Welcome to another episode of the Federal Newswire Lunch Hour Podcast with your host, Andrew Langer.
Well, hey there. Welcome to another episode of Federal Newswire's Lunch Hour Podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Langer. Very excited to be joined today by my guest. His name is Paul Teller.
Good to see you, sir.
Good to see you as well. He's an old friend of mine. We're going to get into your career and where all you've been. He's currently the executive director of Advancing American Freedom,
Yes, sir.
which is this new, it's a 501c4. Not that people need to sort of know that, but it's important. But you worked in the White House. You worked for the vice president. You worked for the president of the United States. You were chief of staff for Senator Ted Cruz, Republican Study Committee, and most importantly, not most importantly, you have a PhD.
It's definitely not most important.
But it's interesting to me because one of the things that we talk about in terms of policy as opposed to politics, right? Because and I'm far more interested in the policy side of things, as I think you are as well.
Yeah.
Is the lack of expertise, the lack of so talk about your experience going and getting your PhD in political science in 1999.
Well, and obviously the long version can come over and drink sometime,
Yeah,
you
of
and me,
course.
but the short version just for today.
No, but think about it like that, though. I mean, that's
No, and it's true. I think for me, what I found, unfortunately, is I was at American University, poli-sci, PhD program, and I realized actually pretty quick that what they were kind of designing there in terms of their students wasn't who I wanted to be.
Okay.
In other words, they were very much designing kind of, insular academic types that publish in academic journals and don't really affect the real world. So that wasn't for me. So even though I finished, I kept doing what I was doing. I started a second tier kind of simultaneous track to do conservative movement stuff. And that's kind of where I became a movement guy.
It raises the question, right, as we have these discussions and debates in America about college loan forgiveness, and we can get into that if you want, but there is this real question in academia about the preparing people for the real world, the training. So I know when I was teaching, the emphasis was on creating sort of a practical skill set. What you're saying is in your PhD program, it was geared towards creating more academics, wasn't it?
Well, no question. In fact, I used to complain that here we are practically a stone's throw from the White House, the Capitol. We never met with congressmen or staff or president and his or her staff, depending on who it was. It was looked down upon. It literally was, we don't do that at grad school. That's undergrad. You can go meet people in the real world. Grad school, we do theory and statistics and methods and things like that.
And now you sort of get, now that we've been through a series of again, because you have a PhD, I have a master's, not to put down folks who go to graduate school, but we've sort of seen how governance in a crisis by the graduate school set and where it got us. I mean, certainly we're seeing that today, aren't we?
Yeah, no question.
Yeah.
Well, because in a lot of these programs, there's this assumption that, if you've studied it kind of thoughtfully and intellectually, you therefore must know how it works in the real world. It's a one-for-one relationship, which of course it's the exact opposite.
So let's take a step back. So were you working on the Hill when you were getting your PhD, or did you take a break?
So the PhD was before the Hill. In fact, I wound up going to the Hill kind of because we were letting this caged horse out of the barn. I spent all my grad school program studying Congress, but not interacting.
So wait, so you went to Duke undergrad. Did you immediately come out and go to
and immediately into grad school?
Okay, there you go.
Yep. And then so the stuff I was doing simultaneously was College Republican National Committee,
got it. I see.
National Center of Public Policy Research. I was there. Washington
realized
Times.
that.
I don't know if you
All
remember.
right.
I was in Washington, writing and selling political advertising.
Yeah.
So that was simultaneous with the PhD.
Sure. And NCPPR at the time was, all of them were doing great work, but I mean, they were, they're still doing great work, but that's a good way to sort of get your feet wet into these kinds of issues that you were dealing with down the road.
Yeah. And especially the College Republican National Committee, because that was at the time when the RNC, Republican National Committee, was very angry at the CRNC, the College Republican. So we had kind of funding disputes and policy disputes within the family. So learned a lot right off the bat.
It's interesting because you talk to the folks who were doing the College Republican stuff in the 80s, our good friend Grover Norquist and Ralph Reed and others, and you see how that played things down the road. So you come out, you come out of your PhD program. But you didn't? Did you go directly to the Hill afterwards?
Yeah, directly to the Hill, and again, feeling like, wow, I've been studying the Hill. I've been asking to interact with the Hill. We did none of it. I'm going to go straight to the Hill. So I wound up actually going to the House Administration Committee.
That's
right. My first Hill job under Chairman Bill Thomas, of California. a strong figure, shall we say.
Sure. Oh, yeah,
to
without a
work
doubt.
on,
And learning how Congress actually runs.
Yeah. And that's the thing. House admin, not necessarily one of the more glamorous committees that everyone clamors to get into, but like you said, great overall view of the Hill.
I've had a conversation recently with Russ Vogt, who we both know.
Great friend. Collaborator.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. And we talked about this issue with OMB and how the importance of OMB in terms of running the government, the OMB director.
Oh my God.
The primal role that plays, primary role, I should say. Going to House administration and then moving on to the policy side of things and guiding that policy side. Actually, one of the questions that I had was, how has the Republican? Well, okay, no, let's start here. Well, it's two things. Which number one is how have congressional relationships changed in the last 20 years, since 23 years? But also, how has the Republican conference changed in terms of sort of the relationships between people and how things are done? Has it changed?
No, it definitely changed.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not that old, but old enough to be able to talk, 2 decades ago when it was okay to have friendships across the aisle.
Yeah.
Now, almost unheard of, or if it happens, it's got to be under the cover of darkness at night.
Of course.
And,
good Lord.
Right? I mean,
nothing good comes from that.
Yeah, you can't. Right, exactly.
You're getting back to a certain member of Congress that you and I both know who had to resign because he was putting out ads in the cover of darkness. But go ahead.
No, exactly.
Yes.
So yeah, I mean, in fact, my current boss, Mike Pence, very much prided himself on being able to take conservative issues and finding a Democrat, co-sponsor, co-lead. We did that with Al Wynn of Maryland, if you remember him. On some very
Small
controversial,
issues,
very controversial campaign issues even.
Well, but Al Wynn
reform.
was, one of those. I know when I was working at NFIB, Al Wynn was one of those guys that we could come to and talk to about issues. Not that I was lobbying the House at the time, but yeah, right. I mean, it's a situation where we talk about politics as blood sport, and we both participated in this. But in the end, right, the way that things have done, we've now both sides have refined out the folks that we could find those compromises with. There are no blue dog Democrats anymore.
No, exactly right. And it seems like, especially on the other side, they get punished if they work with us.
Right.
I mean, especially someone tied to Donald Trump. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
There's no room for any Democrat to collaborate with us anymore.
And certainly it's funny because we'll transition in because it's a good opening up to what was happening at the White House. As President Trump was trying to find that common ground on things like transportation and infrastructure, right?
No question.
Talk about that because you were in the White House, you were working for the president at one point, then you were working for the vice president. But talk about that frustration in terms of, at least I'm saying it's frustration. I may be overstating it. But the opportunities where you can find common ground on things like infrastructure, they weren't willing to give any inch at all. As we all know from President Biden, an inch matters.
Yeah, no.
Yes.
No question.
Yes.
No question. But yeah, I mean, indeed frustrating. I was liaisoning in the legislative affairs shop to the most conservative members of the House and Senate, but we did also each get some Democrats. We wanted to cover everybody. So I had some of the most liberal Democrat senators in my bailiwick. And I did what I could, reached out, invited them to lunch at the White House, and we did. Some would come. The chiefs of staff of really liberal senators, but so hard to work together because, again, just toxic for them to really touch in a public way anything related to Donald Trump.
They didn't want to have any kind of a win, and so and then of course we move into the pandemic and everything gets muddied. Talk about that transition because you'd been up on the Hill. And you had, obviously, you'd known folks who had worked at the White House during the Bush administration, George W. Bush administration, the folks who were lobbying the Hill at the time. But talk about that transition. I mean, we could talk about the transition from House to Senate, but I really think the transition from coming down off the Hill into the White House, how was that different for you?
Oh, just fascinating. And again, that's maybe where being a student of politics came in. Because then you could step back and say, wow, to see the legislative branch from the perch of the executive branch was fascinating. And, not always positive fascinating. But I think one thing that's just hugely different is, when you're working in the executive branch, you've got one principle, right? It all goes up to the president, no matter where you're working in the White House, in the administration. Congress, it's 435 on the House side, 100 on the Senate side. Small businesses, basically, all trying to somehow, collaborate and cooperate. So just the controlled chaos in the Hill is amazing, especially when you kind of see it from 10,000 feet.
When you were at the White House, one of the things that I was talking about with Russ Vogt is the issue of the entrenched bureaucracy.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And obviously, we've had these debates about the elites and the establishment, and they're wanting to hold on to power. The battles you guys were having with folks within the executive branch. I mean, it's not other cabinet officials, but the folks in the career civil servants. Career civil servants, we'll call them. We don't want to lambaste them by calling them bureaucrats, but career civil servants.
Yeah, no question. And the hardest part that we found was, it almost was easier if someone was openly defiant in the bureaucracy. That was almost easier to deal.
Sure.
What was harder was someone who was coming across as polite and helpful and, on the team, but then would slow walk a project. Oh, you wanted that also? I'll get it to you next week. Then it's next week. Oh, you needed 3 things. I'll give you 2 things. The slow walk was the drip, drip, drip kill sometimes of a lot of projects.
Yeah, you're trying to get stuff done, and folks are purposefully doing it. We got a lot. I mean, you had a lot of them. You had obviously at the time there was everybody and their brother who was leaking things to the press.
Yeah.
So it's kind of hard to actually engage in this when you're sort of worried about this. But
I'll give you another example. It was frustrating again, being a pretty externally focused guy, Congress, the conservative movement groups. Sometimes we would make a policy in the administration. President would endorse it. This is it. This is the policy. Yeah. But the webmaster guy buried deep in an agency wouldn't change it on the website. So I was getting phone calls and anger from our angry allies saying, you made the policy, but the website still says the old policy. What's going on with it? And we couldn't get that probably 25-year-old, egghead to change it on the, on the website. Yeah, so that was frustrating.
This is it's something that Russ also said as we were talking, which is you'd have a conversation with somebody and then say, well, I don't work for the president. I work for the presidency, the office of the presidency.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Very frustrating.
Yeah. So
and not true, right?
That's
not what the Constitution says.
Yeah, yes. Elections matter. I mean, in the end, you saw this. So coming back to the Hill, what are some of some of your proudest moments? I mean, talk about this. Talk about whether RSC or working for Cruz. What's something that always comes back? You say, I'm glad I was there for that. I was glad I was a part of that.
Yeah, and I'm blessed with a lot of those moments. The one that really sticks out because the whole movement got behind it was the cut, cap, and balance fight.
Yes,
I don't know if you remember that.
I do.
2011. It was basically it started the Tea Party Congress, and we basically just said, we are not going to raise the federal debt ceiling unless we get immediate cuts. I think it was $100 billion in the first year, spending caps going forward, and a balanced budget amendment sent to the states, cut, cap, and balance.
Yeah.
It was we had not only the positive solutions, but we had a bumper sticker for once.
Sure.
Right? We finally had something we could say easily.
Yes.
Joe America can understand it. And it just wound up being a pretty good success in the end because we did get some spending cuts.
Why is it that Republicans tend to get snookered on stuff like cut, cap, and balance, right? Or the idea of the Democrats will say, well, we will if you let us raise taxes now, we'll cut spending down the road.
Exactly.
Why do Republicans get snookered by this?
It's a good question.
Besides force of habit.
Well, right. Some of it's force of habit. Some of it is trusting nature. I think, you know what I mean? Just kind of, if you grow up as kind of let's say a church-going conservative, you grow up as a trusting, person. And so some of that you bring into politics. But honestly, some of it I also just shrug my shoulders, throw my hands up, and I don't understand.
It's like Charlie Brown in the football. I mean, really. Why does Charlie Brown always let Lucy put the football? He knows, right? And he knows down the road, but it really does become force of habit there. Big difference going up. Obviously, being executive director of the Republican Study Committee. Actually, explain to folks what the Republican Study Committee does, because I think folks need to understand.
Yeah, no, good point. Conservative Caucus, U.S. House of Representatives, founded in the early 70s. Actually, Ed Fulner, who founded the Heritage Foundation, was the first staffer for this Conservative Caucus, founded at a time when Republican leadership was moderating, Nixon moderating, and they said, we need a Conservative Caucus in the House to fight back. So it goes back to that. And so when I was at it from 2001 to 2013, huge history with it, great privilege. It was not only known as the ideological caucus, but kind of the, if you will, the agitator caucus.
I'm laughing because Paul's tenure with the RSC spanned changes in House in the party that controlled Congress.
Absolutely.
And I'll never forget after the 2006 election, coming back and finding you in '07, and they had given you, no joke, they had converted an elevator shaft.
Exactly.
And Paul was in an elevator, but the other option was you would have been off the hill. You would have been in the Ford office building.
Exactly, on the other side of the
so
the highway.
At least you had that.
No, we were happy to have it, but yeah, it was for your listeners. I mean, literally, picture an elevator shaft the size.
Literally,
of
yes. Of
we
course.
had 2 desks in there, no air vent, no window, and it was actually right next to a functioning elevator. So like Joe constituents from all around America would come, press the elevator button, then they'd kind of peek in and see us and be like, honey, come here. There's people in there. Oh my God.
There was a TV show when I was a kid. Now this is going to be really more like a traditional podcast here. It was a TV show when we were kids. I know where I grew up, it was on the local CBS affiliate called Marlowe and the Magic Movie Machine.
Okay, well, I don't think I know it. Actually.
Okay, but literally he had an office that was like in a basement, a sub-basement behind a fake door, and that's what it always reminded me of that show. Obviously, okay, here's a fun question. Obviously, greater satisfaction in being RSC executive director when Republicans are in the majority, but there's got to be something satisfying about being in the minority and running that opposition.
Yeah, no question. Because I think also in the minority is the time to sharpen your pencil.
Sure. Okay.
Right. In other words, it's almost like a retreat behind the front lines and figure out your battle plan for when you're actually coming back up to the front lines and engaging the enemy. So. Maybe that's a little dramatic, but that's how we felt.
Well, I mean, listen, there are ways to sort of do it, and I've because of Fred Smith, I shy away at times from those bellicose analogies, but sometimes you have to do it, especially nowadays. I mean, and actually, that's a really good segue to talk about advancing American freedom because we are really in a battle, and I don't want to overstate it. There is, I don't want to say we're in a civil war, and there are other folks who might say that, but the point is, we are really at a crossroads or an inflection point or whatever you want to call it for the American Republic. Yeah. And so talk about advancing American freedom, what you guys are up to, what you're doing there, but talk about it.
Yeah, no question. First of all, again, it's the the policy organization, issue advocacy organization founded by Mike Pence after the White House as a home base, frankly, to just keep advancing great conservative solutions, that kind of thing. The way we see it is, maybe you can look at it as our mission is past, present, and future. So past, tout and defend the successes of the 4 years of the Trump-Pence administration, no question. President is pushed back as hard as we can against Biden, Harris, Schumer, Pelosi, everything they're doing or failing to do, for the American people. And then future, develop good, positive, forward-looking policy solutions, American solutions, to earn conservative wins in the future. So that's really in a nutshell.
It's a situation, and one of the things I remember because Congressman Pence, not Vice President Pence. His committee was the very first committee that I testified in front of.
How's that right?
It was whichever subcommittee on regulatory reform and oversight.
Okay,
and it was great to be able to talk to somebody who clearly understood the issues. It's funny because literally was going back through the history here and recognizing that. So 2010, I debated Jeffrey Toobin.
Okay.
Which is a whole thing. Set it all aside, and was talking about regulatory costs and the issue of regulation as an important issue going into the 2010 election. First 2 years of the Obama administration, et cetera, and Jeffrey Toobin dismissed it out of hand. Oh, nobody cares about regulation. And to an extent, he was probably right. Fast forward to 2016, the 2016 election, and Marco Rubio at a debate utters the words regulatory budgeting. First time I'd ever heard that in a presidential debate.
Yeah.
And we're now seeing the issue of regulation as one that is really I won't say at the forefront, but certainly more discussed than it's ever been before. I know that the vice president certainly feels that way, that it's an important issue, and others do as well. Talk a little bit about that perspective. I mean, so the vice president was a member of Congress. He was governor of Indiana, then vice president. But talk about things like regulation and how that plays into all of this.
Yeah, no question. I mean, and we see deregulation as a critical element of freedom, right? Because that's where I think Joe America most intersects with an oppressive government.
Without
is
doubt.
When someone saying I'm enforcing this regulation, either via paper or electronic, something, or showing up at your farm, at your ranch and saying, you got a wetland here and we're going to do something about it, that kind of thing. So that's basically the vanguard of freedom or the deregulators, right?
Sure.
I mean, and that's why, frankly, Russ vote is so important.
Right. Every
in that
time
space.
government expands, individual rights are diminished.
Yeah.
You can't reconcile liberty with anti-liberty.
Yeah,
That's the
no
two things I
question,
always
no
say.
question. And that's the thing. And unfortunately, I think too many conservatives focus exclusively on legislation, and that we should focus on that. But if you're ignoring regulation, I think you're missing a really critical element of freedom.
Well, I had this conversation with Congressman Andy Biggs because it's a
Great
conversation that I'd had with another congressman years ago, and he asked me, "Well, whose fault is this? Is the regulatory state grows?" And I said to this because he was expecting me to talk about the agencies and bash the Obama administration, and I was going to do that. I said, but frankly, Congressman, it's your fault because you are passing vague pieces of legislation that allow the agencies to drive a truck through, right? When you don't define what navigable means in navigable waters of the U.S., all of a sudden a dry patch of desert sand becomes a navigable water of the United States.
Well, and I remember one time, I forget what year, but one year at the RSC, we did a count of some large bill, how many times the phrase, the secretary shall, shows up. Because, again, for your listeners, if the secretary shall, that's basically Congress saying, we're not going to make the decision of how something operates. Right. The secretary shall figure that out, basically. And if it shows up 87 times in a bill, well, of course you're going to get more regulation.
So let me ask you this, because one of the things that Congressman Biggs said is he talked about the issue of, and I kind of go back and forth on this, I'll be honest with you. So let's say we have an ethanol standard, right? And Congress is going to enunciate ethanol blends and things like that. Should Congress dictate what exactly the ethanol blend should be, or should it be left to the agencies to do? And again, I go back and forth, but want to know what you think about this.
Let's face it, there will be certain things where maybe the congressmen have not only no expertise themselves, but maybe have no immediate access to the expertise because what they're legislating on is going to happen down the road. And so something has to happen. I get that. But I think 9 times out of 10, they have access to the same, information, experts, whatever, that they could, make those decisions, put it in the legislation.
Especially on those big ticket items, right? We had out of the Supreme Court this last term the West Virginia versus EPA decision, which talked about the major questions doctrine, the idea, can you shoehorn some big administrative decision into relatively benign things? Right, wonderful decision. It could have gone further, but it was great. But this is what we're getting at here, which is, you can't create a whole or reinvent a whole new sector of the economy because the members of Congress were not doing their jobs.
No, exactly right. And, by the way, I also love what President Trump did, right off the bat, that kind of 2-for-1 in-out strategy. Wound up being, I think, in the end, 8-for-1 was what the net wound up being in the end. But that's an amazing point that's new also to Republican thinking, that you can't just say, we're going to hopefully cut it, maybe sort of kind of make it a rule, right? If you're making a new one, you must delete old ones.
It's one of those things where, George W. Bush was elected on a deregulatory platform, and regulatory costs, they certainly didn't go up as much as they did under Clinton, certainly not as much as they did under Obama or now Biden, but they still went up. I think that was a refreshing change that we actually had a president who delivered and a vice president who delivered on their promises. Something, and talk about that in terms of what was happening internally at the White House. There was a real emphasis on saying, hey, we said this during the campaign. We actually have to do this.
Well, and that's the thing. And I wish this got out more. It wasn't even just conversation around the White House. There was literally a large whiteboard in the West Wing, right near the Chief of Staff's office. Down the left side of the whiteboard, all the promises made during the campaign, and then a grid of what stage in the process each promise was. Was it legislation? Was it completed already? Has it not been started yet? Was it regulation? Was it a message? Whatever it was. I just never seen anything like that in my time.
So I get why it wouldn't be reported on by the major media, right? But one of the great frustrations I had during the Bush administration, George W. Bush administration, was that they did not do a better job at telling their story. To even us. And why is it hard for White Houses to tell their story effectively, even to their own allies?
And it's great. And we did try. There's no question. We did try, and hopefully did a half decent job. I think some of it might just be, it is just so excruciatingly busy because of the size of the administrative state. You never have time to kind of stop and turn around and say, what did we do today? Let's pause, take a breath, and sell it.
Right.
It's like, nope, we're on to the next fight, the next 2 fights.
I mean, it's a situation where, part of the reason why the Grover Norquist Wednesday meeting was created was to sort of get folks on the same page. We would get briefings from people, but still, that's a weekly thing. And these things. I remember I got very frustrated with our good friend, I won't say his name, I won't throw him under the bus.
That's right.
But someone who was in charge of letting conservatives know during the George W. Bush administration about what was going on, and the lack of a job they were doing selling the second Gulf War, the invasion of Iraq, and frankly, to an extent, the invasion of Afghanistan. I was like, just show the map. You have Iran and you have Iraq on one side and you have Afghanistan on the other, and Iran can't go anywhere.
Yeah.
Now, not that I'm a huge fan of either of these actions, over 20 years, but at the very least,
explain
the justification
the logic behind it,
just a little bit more. So, in terms of setting agendas and looking at issues today, what are you guys up to? I mean, what are your top tier issues?
No, absolutely. In fact, we're proud of this freedom agenda that we developed. Literally a comprehensive, soup to nuts roadmap of freedom. And it basically, what we're proud about it, well, two main things we're proud of, besides the content and the substance, of course. One, we developed this agenda in a crowdsourced way. In other words, we went to the conservative movement explicitly and asked for input, and also indirectly. In other words, me just being around the movement and others and listening and learning and picking up issues and ideas, very proud of that. But second, we didn't just say, here's a laundry list of things we should do, and it's all federal legislation. We said, you know what is freedom? What does it mean? What's the background of it? What does a free society look like? Oh, and by the way, here are some things that get you to those conditions of freedom. Some might be federal legislation, state legislation, cultural changes, personal things you could even do, family things. So, from what we could tell, it is the most comprehensive agenda out there. We're going to use it, hopefully, to drive the Republican Congress next year.
It's important to have those sort of mission statements out there and talk about the why, right? Yeah. The why is such an important question. Why do we have a constitution that works in the way that it does? Why do we have a notice and comment rulemaking process in the rulemaking process? And because we have friends and enemies who want to get rid of that in terms of the administrative state. But there's a reason why we do these things. And it's important for folks to know those things, isn't it?
Yeah, well, even going back to what we were saying before, deregulation, right? A lot of Republicans, conservatives, whatever, will say, we've got to cut regulation. But they never explain, well, why? What's the point of that? Is it just for the heck of it? You want fewer pages to print? No, you want to give people more ability to make their own choices with more of their own resources without fear of mama government.
And then there's both the direct and the indirect economic impacts as well,
question,
right? I mean,
question.
it acts as a weight on everything. I was saying earlier that so regulatory costs remain constant under Donald Trump. They didn't really shrink per se, but they remain constant over time.
Which is a new thing.
Which is a whole new thing, right? Again, so, and that's important. I call it the regulatory glide path, right? You want things to stay on a glide path because, there's certainty and there are a whole bunch of benefits. Now things have amped up again. We're now at regulatory costs that are over $3 trillion a year.
Amazing.
If we stay on this, we'll be at $6 to $7 trillion by 2030. You've been up on the Hill. You have an economics background. I mean, I know you have a PhD in political science, but talk about what happens in America if we have let's say that we have a GDP of $22 trillion, or 21 trillion, and a third of that, $7 trillion is going to regulatory costs, or a quarter, $6 trillion is going to regulatory costs. What does that mean for America?
Well, right. It seems not even just unsustainable economically.
Well, it is.
But it seems unconscionable,
yes.
Right? It's just, this is not why a free society builds a government, right? To then take things out of the people's pockets so they can make, again, fewer of their own choices and pursue their own happiness.
You talk about this about that freedom and those choices, because it really does, the real world in all of this it's a regulation that makes you do things, and the mandates. I mean, I'm not saying I'm not using any nefarious language here. This is what a regulation. It's a rule.
Yeah.
You do things. It changes behavior. It substitutes someone else's judgment for that of your own. And so that's and then there are these unintended consequences of it. When what I like to talk about is the broken windows theory of economics.
Yeah.
We talk about broken windows, right? So the left says that if I run I have a window replacement or a glass repair shop, and I'm running low on business. If I send my kid through a strip mall and throw bricks through all of the windows, well, I've just created economic activity because all these people are going to be paying me $200 a pop to replace the window.
Exactly.
Whereas you and I both know that what we've now done is we're now forcing somebody to spend $200 that they might have spent on new equipment or somebody's wages for the week or what have you.
Yep.
They're now spending that on this. The issue of opportunity cost is one that gets lost on people.
Totally lost. Yeah. They really don't understand that, if you're taking $1 out of a guy's pocket and, giving it to government, whatever, that dollar could therefore not be used for productive things in the economy. They're not seeing that for some reason.
Why is that so hard for them to understand?
And part of me thinks they don't see it, and part of me thinks no, they precisely see it. They just want the control. They want to be able to say, I want to reach into that guy's pocket. I don't want him reaching into his own pocket to grab the dollar out.
Right. It's what Penn Jillette talks about. He says, charity, people view charity as I'm telling you, Paul Teller, to give your money to the government, so the government give, when really what it is me giving the money. That's charity.
That's charity.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
Yeah, no question. Because you notice whatever the left does never removes power from them or the government. Right. Name one thing that would make them less powerful.
And that's why the Trump administration was so interesting, because they made the promises to shrink the size and scope of government, and then they set about to go ahead and do that in very real terms. But here's my question, and it's an interesting one, at least to me, in that you have folks on the Hill who had the opportunity, right? If Donald Trump was such a massive threat, why didn't Congress take steps to rein in the power of the executive branch?
Yeah.
But they don't, and it's people on either side of the aisle don't do that. Talk a little bit about that impulse.
Yeah, no question.
Not rein it in.
I think you're right. When it's a Republican president, Republicans in Congress don't want to do it because it's like, well, he's our guy, and he's doing limited government things, so we don't want to control him from doing limited government things. And Democrats don't do it as much as they may be upset with whatever Donald Trump was doing. They say, well, I think we're going to win the next election.
Sure.
Then it'll be our guy in there. We don't want to reduce his ability to do things.
Right.
So.
The previous administration, they do these executive orders on regulatory transparency and accountability. The very first thing that Joe Warren and the very first things that Joe Biden does when he comes in is he gets rid of those executive orders on transparency and accountability, which is astounding, right? Because if you are, but getting into this agenda, both for the next Congress, actually, let me leap forward past the next Congress. So it's January of 2025, January 21st, 2025. I don't know when it's going to be. The next president is inaugurated. The next president is a Republican who's inaugurated. For Paul Teller, what is the very first thing that president ought to do their very first day in office?
Oh, great. It's a great question.
Thank you.
Will I have the best answer? Not necessarily,
no, it's okay.
but
your
some of the
answers,
things, right? Exactly. Because in terms of what the number one thing is, haven't quite thought of yet. But in terms of honestly, what I would go back, the way that the Biden-Harris administration went in and undid so many of the key executive orders for freedom-based executive orders that Pence did. I would do the same thing. You undo those Biden-Harris things that reduced freedom, that removed choice across a variety of issue areas. I think you start with that and build from there.
And then you have to go and you have to make sure that those things can get codified, up on Capitol Hill.
And that's the thing too. And that would be another fight is to start somehow culturally convincing Congress to defund the things they say they hate.
Culture to do that, but also things like regulatory transparency and accountability. I've sat down with the folks from the judicial. I'm thinking about the the JCN, but it's the other one. It's the Job Creators Network. Right. It's the one that I'm thinking of. Yeah, it got a little confusing as I was on Twitter the other day looking at that. So they had a really interesting idea, which is, right now small businesses have to demonstrate why they should be left out of regulations. And so they want to flip it on its head and say that now it needs to be the test needs to be given to demonstrate why small businesses need to opt in. I think that would be
exactly right. And again, the left doesn't understand that freedom means the burden is on the government.
Yes.
Not on the citizen, the organization, the private business, that kind of thing.
Talk about the culture, because this is something I know that you're interested in, that your boss is interested in, but this idea of the civics education side of it, which is the idea of getting people to probably the greatest success the left has had over the last generation, right? You and I are the same age.
Yeah.
I know part of why I came to my understanding of America, frankly, I'm not going to hide this, Schoolhouse Rock. I'm just a bill, we the people,
Absolutely.
three-ring circus government, all of those things.
Yep.
I can go on and on.
Oh, yeah.
But over the last generation, there has been a concerted effort to undo this. And part of the problem is, right, if we have no common background, and common sense of who we are as a people, we're never going to have some common sense of the direction that we're in. But also this idea, right, there was this piece in Politico recently, in order to protect the Constitution from Donald Trump, we need to amend the Constitution. This is talk about how we bridge that gap and come back to some kind of an understanding of who we are as a people in America.
Well, no, and you're making great points, because also what happens with that is then you don't look at your fellow man as someone worthy of defending, praising, collaborating with, things along those lines.
Sure.
So, it's not just, it'd be nice if my neighbor put out a flag too. It has to do with, the glue of society. Staying together.
I chuckle because somebody put up on Twitter the other day, I want to find the flag of Martha's Vineyard so I can put that on my I stand with Martha's Vineyard.
Yeah,
and all of this.
no, exactly. So it's very important, and also if you don't share common goals about the country, how it's founded, where we're going as a country, how should you be expected to make common decisions, through your elected representatives or even just neighborhood to neighborhood? So
stunts are important. I'm not gonna. I don't want to discount this, right?
Yeah.
With, the situation with the illegal immigrants in Martha's Vineyard there were substantive things, but it was a stunt, and those are important. But at the end of the day, we need the thoughtful. I'm sorry, this is going to sound like I'm not saying that it's not that they don't have thoughtful governance. How do we get beyond the hot take? Just the idea of trolling, doing things because they troll other people, the stunt. How do we raise the thoughtful governance back to where it ought to be, the place of primacy? Or do we already do that and we just have to engage in these other things?
Some of it is there are folks trying.
Yeah.
Perfect example, Mike Pence, right?
Yeah.
His temperament, disposition, his tone, I think is something we should all emulate.
Sure.
Social media doesn't help, right?
Yeah.
That it doesn't incentivize thoughtful, loving, exchanges of ideas.
Sure.
So I think that's, at least part of it.
Right. Because, and this is something Jerry and I have a lot of, we talk about quite a bit on the other show, which is that the hot take, the invention of the hot take, the idea of racing to be the first with the most inflammatory reaction, and the one that gets you the most eyes. And because we know that, whoever gets the most eyes on their tweets, they can then turn around and they'll be the ones who are the next pundits on Fox or whatever. There's a problem in this, isn't there?
Yeah, no question. And let's face it, some of it's also even monetary, meaning like if something gets more clicks, well, you could sell more advertising against it, right? So, there's a monetary incentive, too, to kind of be as flamboyant as you can, which, again, sometimes is a role for that, but a lot of times that's just unfortunate.
But some of this comes from leadership and leaders who are saying we need to be better people. We need to be better with ourselves. And unfortunately, we're in an era in which that tends to get poo-pooed as well. So turning our attention elsewhere, because, so I think I mentioned this to you, and I know I mentioned this on other shows. I had contemplated this other podcast called Outside Interests, which is this idea of sitting down, and I got this inspiration. I'll tell you how. There were a couple times. I had dinner with somebody, policy person, been in the trenches for years, found out that they were an avid vinyl collector. We had this incredible discussion of music, then found out that a senior staffer over on the Senate side that you and I both know is passionate about music. Larry Spywak at the Phoenix Center.
Okay, sure.
The great telecom guy. Plays...
Speaking of a warrior against, regulation.
Oh, yeah, 100%. But he also is an accomplished blues harmonica player. I don't know if you know this. But it's that kind of idea. So I want to talk to you about Outside Interests. We're going to get fully into Star Wars in a second.
Oh,
but
perfect.
I want to talk about, you're married. You have kids, right?
Yep. 19-year-old girl, 16-year-old boy.
Wow. I don't think I knew that.
Yeah.
Wow.
19-year-old's at UVA. Sophomore.
Excellent. Okay.
16-year-old, Bethesda Chevy Chase High School.
There you go.
Living at home with us.
My 20-year-olds at College of Charleston. My
fantastic.
17, soon to be 18-year-olds at William and Mary. So,
Okay, excellent.
Yeah, so you're almost an empty nester.
Yeah,
we are now empty
you can
nesters.
see,
Yeah,
right?
you see it in the horizon.
Yeah.
What are you and your wife looking down towards as being empty nesters? I mean, but what are the kinds of things you guys do when you have your downtime? Now that you have more downtime, now you're no longer at the White House.
Although I tell you, it's not feeling that we have that much more downtime,
Sure,
right?
yes.
We're still trying to, advance freedom as the name says. But no, let's face it, right? It's definitely, fewer crazy days now
Sure,
than,
of course.
than during the White House.
I would hope so.
But I think we're just filling it with stuff we love, and usually that involves other people, meaning
Yeah.
like just social engagements, dinners, a weekend trip or longer. Even things like work trips, tack on an extra day, make a little thing out of it.
That's what I said when I talked to Congressman Andy Biggs. I said, let's say I'm going out to a conference in Arizona. I tack on an extra day.
Yeah.
What do I do in Arizona 5? This
Right.
is this is the perennial question there.
Yeah, no
So
question.
have you done any big trips in the last year? I mean, any place that-
You're going to love this. Our last big trip was Martha's Vineyard.
Oh, is that right?
That was a 2-week family vacation in August. So
You got 2
we
weeks,
just
huh?
missed the I was blessed to have 2 weeks, and we just missed the hubbub there by a few weeks, I guess. But
So you again, you and I are the same age,
Yeah.
or at least we graduated college the same year.
yeah,
And so that means we were the same age when Star Wars came out.
absolutely.
So I'm going to go down this road because
No,
you're
please,
here and
please.
I have you here. So that was talk about that. Talk about. Do you remember where you first saw Star Wars?
Yeah,
New Hope,
totally.
Chapter 4.
Yeah,
talk about it.
Age 6 in the theater. Hicksville, Long Island, New York.
Because you're a Long Island guy.
Long Island, Jewish guy, and just I can picture waiting online. I can just picture that feeling afterwards, and been a fan ever since.
Okay, so when you play Star Wars, were you a Han or a Luke? Or were you weren't a Chewbacca? That I know.
Here's the thing. Maybe this sounds dark, whatever. I was actually more of a Darth Vader.
Is that right?
Yeah, I was very impressed by
I was
him.
terrified by Darth Vader as a kid. I mean, literally, when I would watch Star Wars, I think for the first couple of years that I saw Star Wars, I would literally have to cover my eyes when Darth Vader would go
Is
on
that right?
the rebel Corsair ship.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And I loved how, as the episodes proceeded, they added some complexity to him.
Sure, of
and
course.
is he good? Is he not? Is he conflicted? Is he not? So
Did you watch
good character?
So I know we haven't gotten to neither you and I have seen Andor yet.
No,
Well,
but I'm excited. Hopefully, soon.
Did you watch the Obi-Wan series?
Yeah. I loved it. I know that
sure.
not every Star Wars fan loved it. I don't know. I thought it was fantastic. I thought how they handled the conflict between Obi-Wan and Vader,
Excuse me.
Anakin, and effects, and I thought a great story. Some new characters they introduced, just wonderful.
Bringing back Hayden Christensen was the right thing to do. It's a little weird to have the little baby Princess Leia in it. Not to add spoilers.
Although
to
great
everybody.
actress,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Great little
yeah.
actress there.
Yeah,
So,
it's good. I'm looking forward to Andor. It's one of those things that's funny because there are things I liked about Solo. I was a Han Solo guy. Loved Han Solo since I was
same, absolutely.
But the Solo movie, it had me until the space train.
Is that right?
Yeah, the
Really?
train on the planet was a little. Besides the fact, I can't remember. It came out after Captain America.
Okay.
So, which also had the train. Let's rob the train thing.
Yeah.
So it was a little. It was a little
not
reductive.
not
for
your
me.
biggest.
Yeah.
moment.
Looking forward to. So you're looking forward to Andor.
Yeah.
That's going to be good. And then Mandalorian coming out down the road.
Yeah. No,
Have
of
you,
course.
Have you been down to the Galaxy's Edge at Disney?
I have to say I haven't,
Yeah,
which
neither
is
have I.
very disappointing of me. I know, but
No, I haven't either. I mean,
haven't done it, yeah.
it's a matter. I want to. It's just a matter of timing. So that's good.
Well, and the rumor is, and again, I haven't been there, but the rumor is a lot of the classic old characters are not represented there for some
because
reason.
it's a whole different sort of world thing.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this. 'Cause it's interesting because could not really get my kids into it. Your kids, are they?
Yeah, they're into it.
into it.
Yeah,
That's-
they're
there you go.
enjoying it, yeah.
I failed miserably, and I don't know if it's because I maybe showed them Star Wars: A New Hope at a too early an age. I don't know.
Oh,
I'm
interesting.
also, by the way, a firm believer, and I'm sure you're familiar with the machete order for showing the films. Are you familiar with
I
this?
think so. No.
So there are traditionally two ways of doing it.
Yeah.
You either do it in the order in which they were
Right.
released, or
Yeah.
you do it in the order of the chapters.
Yeah.
Now, machete order is great. Those of you who don't know. You start with Chapter 4, A New Hope, the first Star Wars. You go Chapter 4, Chapter 5, Empire Strikes Back.
Okay.
Then when you have the big reveal, spoiler, Darth Vader is Luke's father.
Right.
Then you go back to, and in fact, you can either skip Episode 1 entirely, which I kind of recommend, and you go to 2, 3, or 1, 2, 3, and then you jump back in for 6, because so 1, 2, 3 are just a flashback.
Yeah.
After the end of 5. And then you do the rest, which to me is
very interesting.
Yeah, listen, I spend way too much time.
Well,
doing
then
this.
no, but here's a complication. What do you do with things like Rogue One? That would be between 3 and 4.
Okay, so you put those back in the order. Yeah, sort of add those back in. So you go 1, 2, 3, and then
Rogue One or
Solo. I think 1, 2, 3 Solo, then Rogue One, then you come back. I suppose. I don't know. Something that's
a tough one. It's a tough one, right?
sort of put in there. So it's all good. So this is good stuff. So how do folks find out more about the work you're doing?
Well, really appreciate it. Website is going to be our best way. AdvancingAmericanFreedom.com. AdvancingAmericanFreedom.com. You can sign up for email updates, poke around. We've got different collaborations on there, videos, press efforts, and just everything you can want there, including our freedom agenda.
There you go.
Right on there.
I will make sure I tweet it out as well. Dr. Paul Teller, thank you so
very
much
honored
for joining
to be here,
us.
sir.
And thank you all for joining us for another episode of the Federal Newswire Lunch Hour. I'm your host. I'm Andrew Langer. Enjoy the rest of your lunch. See you next week.
This has been the Federal Newswire Lunch Hour Podcast, hosted by Andrew Langer. Check out the Federal Newswire's family of websites, as well as their social media stream